everyone. My name is Rafa. I am the founder of Being Invincible. It's a page about women empowerment. I enforce, and we are open to speak about women facing different aspects of life, talking about, relevant issues like PCOS, beauty standards on social media. So hello, Aqsa. How are you?
Hi, good. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. I'm so excited to have this opportunity, to ask you questions about your short film, American Eid. I watched it and I really enjoyed it. I actually was able to relate to it as well. I grew up here. I was actually born in Abu Dhabi, UAE, and I moved here when I was 10 years old. And growing up here, not having Eid as a holiday, whereas when back in UAE, it's a Muslim country, and I always had the day off. So I was able to relate to it completely. My first question to you was, how was the experience of shooting the film during a pandemic? I know I saw a scene where, the children were celebrating Eid with the parents, and it was not a big crowd, but it was quite a crowd. So how did you manage shooting a film during the pandemic?
It was, I think that was the hardest part for sure for all of us. We were one of the first shorts, one of the first films also rolling out that was shooting during the pandemic. So everything was new. Everybody was kind of figuring it out. And we also shot this in November, the week of the election. It was really crazy time. Like our last shoot day was November 3rd. And that was the day with the party scene. So it just felt very serendipitous to have a scene like that on the election day. It was a strange moment, and apparently Mercury was in retrograde. Somebody was telling me, I don't know what that means, but yeah, it was a hard shoot overall. I feel like working with children, you don't get 12-hour days, you get limited hours, and then add COVID to that, your hours are even more shortened. So it was definitely a challenging shoot in that terms. I just didn't get as much time with my actors as I would have loved to, but they were troopers. They're all made it through. And it was Amina, our main actress's first time ever acting. She never auditioned before. This is her first role, and she just went with it. It was a very challenging shoot for a first time actor.
Wow, and she did an awesome job actually being the lead actress.
Yeah, she was amazing.
I don't know if I'm able to ask another question. I know you didn't grow up in the States, so I wanted to ask you, how did you incorporate the right emotions and the issue, for children growing up in the States and not having Eid as a national holiday? How are you able to relate to it and bring that, into a film?
Yes, like you, I grew up I was born in Pakistan, Sargodha, Pakistan, and then I moved to Kuwait and kind of was raised there with my parents. Both my parents were migrant workers in Kuwait. So I was raised in Kuwait my whole life, and I immigrated to US when I was 21. And I immigrated alone. My family was still back in Kuwait at that time. And I remember every Eid, this is supposed to be my new home, right? I moved to the US, I'm immigrated here, it's my new home. But every Eid and Ramadan, I didn't have a community to celebrate with. And I would just go to work, and I just felt so lonely. And I'm like, this is my new home. In this home, I can't even celebrate a holiday, talk about it, let alone people hardly even knew about what it was around me. Again, I didn't have my community with me. And it just felt so wrong. I felt like Islam and Muslims were just known for such wrong things in the Western side of the world. And it was just infuriating on top of that. So I think that idea of because I just felt like I had to assimilate and not talk about Eid, and because nobody around me knew about it, so I should just keep quiet. Is that what we've been told our whole life? Assimilate, right? Don't make a big deal if you don't get anything, just be grateful for what you have. It's kind of passed down to me. So I kind of realized if I want everybody to know about it, I just have to talk about it. So I kind of started as a Zainab, where I'm oh, maybe I should assimilate, maybe I shouldn't talk about it, to becoming Amina, where I'm I want to talk about it. I want to tell everybody about it. I want to make a film about it, because there's been no film about Eid. And so that was the experience, comes from that same idea of if home is not a place that you can celebrate what means so special to you, then is it really home? That's the heart of the story at the end of the day. And I realized in order for home to accept, in order for me to accept home, the home has to accept me for who I am. And that's, I think, the new generation of immigrant stories we're kind of getting into. It's not a one-way street, it's a two-way street. You both have to accept each other.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for answering my questions.
Of course.
So my name is Mavish Ahmed from Faces of Pakistan. I am the founder of the platform. So my main initiative is to highlight Pakistanis from all around, creating a positive image. And I think you've done such a wonderful job, Aqsa, in doing that.
Thank you.
So American Eid is, wow, just a dream for me. Growing up as a Pakistani American in New York, I basically was Amina, and till this day am. The experiences that have been highlighted in the short movie is it feels like home, you know, whether it's the parents speaking in Urdu or wearing shalwar kameez to school, or talking about how amazing here is, you know. So it was always, for me, it was so difficult to balance out my identity, because it was either you were Pakistani or you were American. It was never a blend of both. And I love how beautifully American Eid shows that you can be both and be proud of where you come from and create an identity of being Pakistani American.
Totally.
So, yeah. So my question for you is, what was your experience like working with such an amazing cast, you know, whether it was Ayat, Fazilat, Rahila Mahmood, who's also known as Mama G?
Yeah.
They're so great.
It was incredible. First of all, it was just so nice to have a cast that they all were like Muslims, you know, so they all understood the heart of it. They all celebrate Eid and Ramadan, and they understood they all had the experience of like, yeah, being in a country that's home and not being able to talk about Eid or not being able to take days off for Eid. So everybody experienced that inherently. So I think that emotion was there because it was such a true experience. And what's so strange about me is, like, you know, as much as I knew that nobody got holidays for Eid here publicly, strangely enough, I was like, oh, this is my story. And when we were sharing this, when I shared the film, everybody was like, I experienced the same thing. This is like kind of my story. And it just goes to show how universal our experience as immigrants are, and us finding our home within this home is. And I think something about that is just so beautiful. And all the cast had that in common. And I just thought that was beautiful. Also, Shanessa was in Dubai. She was raised in Dubai before moving to the US, the actor who plays Amina. So she had the experience of, again, like, you know, having Eid as a holiday and then all of a sudden not having it.
Exactly, because it's so different when you're home and how the lifestyle is with embracing the culture. And then when you step outside of it, it's you feel so alienated. So
exactly,
they brought that to mainstream and brought awareness to the culture itself.
Yes, and it's so important to highlight like just the things that we celebrate our culture and our religion. You know, I feel like for so long everything about us has been like associated to just negative image or just trauma, and I feel like that has become our identity, and the kids are growing up watching that instead of watching something that is celebrating them. And that we don't realize the side effects of that is so inherent. Like, you start internalizing it. You start internalizing, that's who I am. I'm supposed to have traumatic experiences to be a Pakistani American, you know, or a Muslim American. So I feel like it's so important for us to tell stories that are just about celebrating us, because there's been too many that is not.
Yes, and I love how the family themselves that were showcased were just like the next door family. So, you know, very close to home. I felt like I was watching my Ummi Abu, and just, you know, the comfort of itself. It was so beautifully shown. So
Thank you.
It's a lot. It means a lot for a Pakistani
Thank you.
American. Yeah.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
But
Aqsa, this is Jawad Abdurrahman with Unity Productions Foundation, and Most Resource stands for Muslims on Screen and Television. And we are a resource for the entertainment industry for Hollywood. We consult on series and so on. And first of all, congratulations and really wonderful contribution I can relate somewhat. I mean, growing up, being of Pakistani descent, but growing up in a small town in Indiana in the United States, I remember trying to explain to my friends that barfi, my favorite dessert, was not actually made of barf, you know, as they thought it was. And the shalwar kameez does look different if you actually tie the little zarban inside it. It's not this gigantic thing that stretches out, you know, forever.
Yeah.
But I was very fortunate that I did have access to a loving, small Muslim community. And so I have fond memories growing up of Ramadan and Eid and so on. But talk to us a little bit about the sibling relationship. I mean, that's really the heart of the story, the two girls and the annoying little sister, but the older sister is trying to show that she's an adult now and she's different. She's going to be her own person, but she still has this love for her little sister. Talk to us. Were you influenced at all by your own sibling relationship in that? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Definitely. I definitely wanted to going into this. I wanted to tell a Eid Disney story, you know, but soon I realized that there has to be that's an engine, but like what is really the heart of it? And it's kind of there is an immigrant story there and assimilation story there. So how could you showcase that? And it just made sense to do two sisters who are different walks of life. You know, one is like this 9-year-old who's just not conscious or self-conscious enough. The other one is a preteen teen who's just getting so aware about her surrounding. And I think I just love the idea. I think what I like about Zainab is, and I think a lot of Muslim friends of mine relate to, is that she's not ashamed of who she is. She just doesn't like to go out and talk about it like Amina does, right? Like she fasts. She would fasted like a lot of days this month. And Amina, that's why Amina wants to make Eid even more special for her, because she fasted so many days this year. And I feel like that is such a common thing for us, where we like, I know so many of my friends that were like, yeah, I fasted during Ramadan and I went to school and I didn't talk about it. And people just would question like, hey, why aren't you eating with us? Or why aren't you drinking? Or why can't you play this sport? And it's just so many like things that because there's so many steps and nuances to understand and nobody understands, we just like hide it and we lie about it. And that's an experience I thought that was a complex experience that was interesting to showcase through a sister relationship. And that's something that Amina just can't comprehend. She just can't understand. Why wouldn't you just tell people we fasted? And I come from a family of 5. We are 5 siblings together. So I come from a big family. I'm huge into sibling relationships. I love telling stories about that, because I feel like it's interesting. What's so interesting about siblings is it's like they come from the same background, it's the same nurture, right? But their nature is what makes them interesting and different. They will learn from each other. So seeing siblings coming from the same nurture and having different nature is always a fascinating topic for me to explore. And I've seen that within all my 5 siblings. We're so different, but even though we have the same upbringing, you know, it's fascinating.
I'll pass it along, and if there's time, I'll ask a second question.
Hi.
Hi.
So I love the fact that this entire story kind of has a very point of view storyline from a kid's perspective, which I think is like the most adorable thing, because we kind of just like follow up with it because you kind of relate to it, because as a kid, kind of have this hard time trying to approach other people and trying to like explain them like, hey, this is my culture. And they're like, oh, hi. So I kind of just want to just want your perspective on that, like your own personal view towards, you know, as a child, trying to convince someone about their own culture and trying to convey that message. You've done it in such a beautiful way. Can you just talk about that process?
Yeah, definitely. I felt like, you know, one of the reasons I wanted to tell the story for us, you know, I never wanted to like filter it through a Western gaze. Never wanted to be like, oh, this is for an American audience. The story was for it had to be authentic, you know. Obviously it's for everybody, but I didn't want to like filter it through one gaze. So what was important for me, I remember as I was writing this story, I kept on thinking like, oh, do I need to filter this for people to understand what Eid is? Should I be comparing this to Christmas, for example, right? And I realized, like, why do I need to do that? I grew up watching so many stories on Christmas from Disney. I never got filtered to me, but I understood what those stories were about because it was told through a character, right? A character that cares about something and goes on a journey. And by the end, the audience is like, oh, I understand why this is so meaningful to her. And I feel like nothing is more powerful seeing that, other than seeing it from a child's perspective. Something about her innocence and her love for Eid just conveys it even in a more powerful way. Like the audience by the end of the day understands like, oh my gosh, this is a very magical holiday for these kids, and that the fact that they can't celebrate it is just inherently wrong. Or like the pressure of not being able to celebrate or not being able to take days off. And when you immigrate to a new place, it's just so hard for parents to be like, yeah, take the days off, we'll take work off. Like, it's our first couple months here, we can't afford to do that, and we want to be the best because we immigrated and starting all over. That pressure a kid will never understand. So I thought like just filtering it from a kid's perspective is just so you kind of like don't have to worry about the adult logistics, but you also care a lot more about the story and what's the stake for her. Seeing a kid's heartbreak on screen is the worst. It just breaks your heart in a million pieces.
That's completely relatable. I would like to ask a second question, but I guess like Jawad said, I can like ask it afterwards if someone else wants a turn.
All right, hey there. I loved your film. It was really nice, and as like an immigrant teenager, I completely understood the storyline and the message you were trying to convey. So I wanted to know, what was like the best part of creating American Eid?
The best part, I would say the fact that there is a Disney castle logo at the beginning of the film, but followed by an Eid story. That is something I always wanted as a child, just to see that. I still get teary-eyed every single time I see the castle logo. It's just so meaningful because it's such a big brand, like Disney's such a big brand, and to have it associated with something so special to us it makes it even more global. It just feels like we're sharing it with the whole world, and something about that is so beautiful. I think that would be very special. And also, I think for me, the biggest realization was, it was last May. Like I said, when I first moved here, like I didn't have my community, I didn't have my family here. I was alone. So every Eid and Ramadan was so lonely for me. Like nobody around me even knew what it was. And then all of a sudden, because I made this film, the people that I work with would like message me and be like, oh, it's Eid next week, so we won't email you that day, or you can take the day off. Just those little things makes you feel like you belong. Like I finally felt like I'm home. Like, everybody around me knows it and respects it. And that is just so big. And I really hope that people can like wish their non-Muslim people can wish their Muslim friends Eid Mubarak and urge them to take the time off, or urge them to be like, I don't have to work or don't have to email me on that day. I think that just says so much. Even that little act says so much about you being your home, at your home. So that to me was the most special arc. I felt like I was home.
Of course.
Just a follow-up question. Thank you, Aqsa, for sharing that. Just a follow-up question for you. If I understand correctly, you've produced some commercials before. And so contrast the experience a little bit between this short and commercials. I mean, even in a commercial, there's a narrative structure. But do you think that helped you? I mean, the fact that in 30 seconds or in 1 minute, you have to convey a whole story, is that something that helped you? And then talk to us about some of the other projects you're working on.
Definitely. I feel like it helped me in the sense that you have so much time, like 30 seconds to tell a visual story, right? And it really helps you train your brain to think more visually. Like the opening of the film, I had to convey so much about the sisters' relationship. That's why the photo on the wall was like an effective tool, because you just get to see a history of their relationship and how this celebrated in Pakistan and what life was like before they were in America. And all that is told in such a brief couple seconds with music juxtaposed. So I feel like that kind of a mindset is really helpful when you're telling a short film like that, when you have to establish so much in 20 minutes. That was definitely a big challenge. And the kind of projects that I'm working on right now, I'm so passionate about telling stories that are just unapologetically about us, and yet at the same time not about us. For example, I think it's so important to tell stories about your identity. but and you can also have stories where the story isn't a party identity, but it features a Muslim character, you know. And I think the nuance, like we should be able to tell all kinds of stories, and I think one is not enough. I keep saying this again and again, like I think it's so important for everybody to understand, like Islam and Muslims spread across so many cultures and countries and languages, even within Pakistan. Like there's so many like layers of Pakistanis, you know, like so that just one story isn't enough, and you got to keep making stories that feature these protagonists that are Muslim and humanize them. And because we have, I think, in a way that I have seen, the media has created a glass ceiling for us. All these years, our stories have not been told by us. And inherently, because of that, there is a glass ceiling of who we are, created by others for us. And every story we tell, even if it features a Muslim protagonist and doesn't necessarily have to do about the identity, humanizes it and it cracks that glass ceiling a little. And one story is not going to completely crack it, but if we tell like 100 stories, it's going to eventually crack that ceiling. And that's what I hope to do, is to tell stories like that, to just show us as who we are, the real us.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I guess I would like to follow up with the exact same thing you said about breaking the glass. I think our like the Star Wars star Riz Ahmed also tried to bring this thing up like a few weeks back. And I thought that was amazing because like he talked about stereotyping and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So I would like just wanted your point of view on that. That how can you just like explain like in your own way that how can we break these barriers and stereotypes and bring them into mainstream? Because there are like few stars you'll see, like Kumail Nanjiani, like starring in Eternals, which was like a huge news here. We're like, what? And so like there were like different, there are like very few people that are breaking those barriers. But can you like talk about how we can like even as a Pakistani or as an American, or like take approaches to like break these stereotypes? Do you like have, like for example, like American Eid? This is a huge step forward because no one has really talked about Eid in a mainstream project, especially like Disney bringing that up, directing it, and you know, like that's a very different approach. So can you like talk about that?
Yeah, I feel like I definitely agree, because one of the things I questioned is like, why there's like more than 1.8 billion Muslims around the world, and the fact that Eid and Ramadan is not mentioned in mainstream media, it just blows my mind. And the stuff that's mentioned, that's stereotyping us, it just goes to show that the way to break barriers is to just tell stories that are for us and are about stuff that really means a lot to us. Because sometimes what we do is, I think inherently it used to be that we were telling stories for a Western audience because we thought that was our market, right? Like it was I think inherently we thought our market was so limited that it was defined by like, a Western audience. And then because I remember when I was in film school, I wanted to write all these things. And one of the biggest questions people would ask me is like, who will see it, right? It's not that we didn't exist. We were always there. It's just we were never counted in the market statistics, right? And I think that just blows my mind. And now the world is getting more and more global, markets opening up everywhere, streaming services just getting more accessible. And now we're like, hold up, there is a market. And in order to reach our people, we just have to tell stories for us, that are about us and not necessarily filtered for a Western audience. And I think that's the only way we'll break those barriers, is to make sure be aware of the gaze we're using when we're telling our story, you know, the lens we're using. And I have to like constantly remind myself of that, because I have grown up consumed so much of media that is Western oriented, you know, that is filtered for a Western audience. In a second. Like, I'll give you a really specific example of, like, yesterday I was trying to write a character's name. I was trying to come up with a character's name for a story. And I made a list, and I just took a step back and I was like, okay, all the names on this list have been subconsciously picked by me in terms of what is the easiest to pronounce for a Western audience. Not for me, I can pronounce all these names, but the fact that I even had that subconscious thought and I was aware of it and I caught myself and I just named the character what I thought was I'm going to name, and people can learn the names. That's a good example to show like how we are so conditioned to think from a Western mindset, and we have to constantly challenge ourselves. And by doing that, we will break those barriers, I believe.
Like our Starbucks name, I feel like growing up,
yes,
generic name that, you know, let's make it easy for everyone else. And even with that, it's always messed up.
I know. So, and it's so funny. And we learn names. We learn such complicated English names.
Right, exactly. No, I completely agree. And I wanted to add, thank you so much for normalizing Islam in the mainstream media. Disney is such a huge platform, and to receive that recognition and normalize the Muslim community, I loved how when the movie started, you could hear a bit of the azan. And it's these tiny elements that hit so close to home to us, and it's so beautifully showcased for other communities to understand where we come from, and, you know, explaining where we're coming from. I like how Ramadan was brought up as well, fasting was brought up. And just because, you know, one of the sister had said that nobody cares, but I feel like as a Muslim, you should care enough to speak and voice your community, you know? And I think that's the step that we need to take as Muslims. And you've, again, done an amazing job representing the community and giving us a voice.
That's so true. If we don't do it, who will? Nobody's going to do it for us. So we kind of have to take the step forward. Yeah. And it's just, it's also really sad because I feel like one of the biggest things I noticed when I was casting, especially the young actors, is how many of them couldn't speak Urdu fluently, you know. And that's because like when our parents immigrated, like our parents' generation immigrated here to the US, that was a big thing: assimilate. Because if you stand out, you will get punished, you won't get the job, you won't get into the groups. And it's just so sad because we are losing so much of who we are in order to do that. And I think this generation is being aware of that, and we're like,
absolutely,
like,
and embracing,
like fighting against it. Exactly.
To preserve the culture and even the language. Like my family was the complete opposite, and they were like, Urdu, nice. Like you need to speak right now. So all my phone calls would be in Urdu, and just being, till this day, I think it's so important to preserve that. Yeah,
I agree. And I want to shout out to, there's this amazing Urdu class in Brooklyn. I don't know if you know Shahid. I'm blanking on his last name, but he has this Urdu class in Brooklyn, in Little Pakistan in New York, where he basically goes and gets all the children that like don't speak Urdu at home and like and trains them. So it's kind of nice that he's preserving that, you know. Kids who didn't grow up speaking Urdu have a class to go to if they want to learn how to read and write.
I think my parents would create that class and just bring
I live in Pakistan and my sister can't speak in Urdu. Like she is like,
oh, wow.
I'm serious. She would like sit over there. She's like, she knows Urdu, but she won't speak it because she's like, you know what? No.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Where in Pakistan?
I live in Islamabad. Like
wow.
I'm like in the midst of everything where everyone's speaking in Urdu and my sister chooses English over Urdu. So yeah.
That's so funny. Yeah, it's just sad how much we like not prioritize it or not value it, I think. And I think our generation is learning like, hey, hold up, this is wrong. Like we're losing an entire language, you know. That's just so sad to me. And I'm like, we're preserving it with all our hearts. We will. I have so much hope.
I have one last question. My page is, you know, it focuses on the journey of the person, and our target audience are young women to pursue their passion. So my question to you is, how did you and when did you realize that you wanted to become a film director?
This is like I feel like for me, the biggest thing I realized is the power of it, is when I realized I wanted to be a filmmaker. So I, like as mentioned, I grew up in Kuwait. From Pakistan to Kuwait as a construction worker, and my mom did as a maid. So they both were part of the migrant class, like lower class. And I grew up in a society where we were just treated like second-class citizens in Kuwait. And people around me, their passport used to get taken away, and it was so normalized. Like, oh, your passport's taken away as this insurance so you don't run away, right? And I remember thinking like, that's how the world functioned until I watched all like film and TV and exposed myself. And I'm like, wait a second, that is not okay. like what happened, right? So the bubble I was raised in was bursted because of something I watched. And I thought that's the power. That's the power of film and TV. And I was able to connect that thought even with not true representation. Like nobody looked like on screen that I was like, wait a second, that girl is empowering me to do something. There was nothing like that for us, right? But I was like, imagine the amount of change you can bring if somebody that looked like me was on screen and a girl was watching this that looked like her and was questioning her societal injustices as a result. And that's when I realized the power of mainstream filmmaking and how much we can get people to start questioning things around them that are not necessarily right. That's when my love for filmmaking started. And I was like, and that's why when Disney doing something like this on Disney platform is so huge, because the power of a media like this that spreads across so many countries and people is it's so powerful. I think people underestimate how powerful it is. So that's like the kind of stories I want to tell, is that just bursts people's bubbles and makes them question.
Truly is. And I look forward to seeing more work from you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. I think our time is up, but thank you so much for participating and for the great insight.